G'day. Today I had a good chat with my good friend Dr. Bill Bowden. Bill's been in the ag department all of his career. He did a PhD and he's an expert in soil nutrition, all things soil nutrition. We talk about trace elements, talk about phosphorus, we talk about rock phosphate, how that might work for Africa, talk about soil pH, we talk about, he's actually an expert on surface chemistry. So he understands the surface level of chemical reactions with fertilisers. Now, I don't really understand it that well, but I think if you're a bit of a chemist, I think you'll get a lot out of what Bill Bowden says. So enjoy my good friend, Dr. Bill Bowden. Right, well, today, it's great to be talking to you, Bill. Bill Bowden, Dr. Bill Bowden, in fact.
The uni likes the doctor.
Yeah, well, and the world needs to know that you've got a significant study behind you as well. Tell me, what got you into agriculture? Why did you go agriculture, not engineering or something like that?
Well, originally I thought of medicine and then I thought vet, but I used to spend time in the summer up on an orchard and
in WA?
In WA, yeah, up at Mahogany Creek, and the people there were quite different from my family. My family is very Victorian sort of upbringing, and these were very liberal couple with no kids. And I thought I was keen on agriculture, but in fact, when I look back on it, I was keen on the change in environment. So the cadetship came up. I applied, and
that's the Department of Agriculture cadetship.
Yep. I applied and got it. We needed the dough to get me through.
Yeah.
My parents were very good. They sacrificed a lot they said they could only give us an education, nothing more, and they made a point that we all got tertiary education.
So what did your parents do? What was their background?
Oh, Dad worked with elders and Mum was a typist with West Farmers when they got together. Yeah.
Okay.
But
so you went to uni, you enjoyed and soil science took your fancy more than animal science?
No, the plant nutrition where I ended up was as boring as batshit to my mind. Well, I won't mention names, but the lecturers were very pedantic, straight. There were no challenges, nothing like that. And it was the last place I was going to end up in, was plant nutrition.
Yeah.
I always was very good with my maths and my chemistry. Eventually, when we all graduated, they compensated the year before it all failed, the cadets, and so they had something like 8 or 12 cadets in my year. And no, they had 12, I think, and 8 got through, and they allocated positions to them, and it was, you had a bit of choice, but I just couldn't be bothered, so I got the last position going, which was plant nutrition.
And that was before your PhD?
Oh, yeah. And my philosophy, though, it's a bit interesting. I'm not ambitious, so I say make the most of what you're doing as opposed to, like what you're doing as opposed to do what you like. So I haven't gone that direction. And once I was in nutrition, it can be as interesting as anything else if you play the game correctly.
You end up doing your PhD in phosphorus, and in Western Australia, when I grew up on the farm in Jerramungup, the government was basically, when I was a kid in the 60s, giving phosphorus away. You remember that? When did you?
Well, I wasn't doing phosphorus in my PhD, incidentally.
Okay.
It was in fact surface chemistry, which is very different.
Right, okay.
Phosphorus can bugger surfaces, that's right. I ended up in phosphorus because at that stage when I joined the ag department and I got into the plant research division, they had a nutrition branch, and it was, people had a speciality. We had Mason in nitrogen, Gartrell in bloody trace elements, and I ended up in phosphorus. Well, in fact, I initially started in soil testing, and phosphorus was the only cab on the rank to become a candidate for soil testing. There'd been no soil testing in WA to that point.
So that was late 70s?
Early 70s, yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Well, I graduated in 64, so yeah.
Well, it was a big thing in the 60s, wasn't it? Phosphorus was being poured out because our soils are pretty...
Sub and super was the answer to everything.
Subterranean clover and superphosphate,
yeah. And lupins were just emerging.
Yeah. John Gladstone's.
Yeah.
So our soils are pretty infertile, aren't they? Our native sandy soils.
They are the most infertile you can possibly have. It's
Do you remember what parts per million the native vegetation, sandy soil, Banksia type sand would have? Is it be 2, 3, 5?
In total, they have about 300 or 400 parts per million.
But available?
And available is at detection limits. It's depending on the test you're doing.
Yeah.
But 2 or 3, which is
pretty low.
It's zero.
Yeah.
Basically, it's zero.
And is that why between Perth and Geraldton, you see the vegetation there that's only about a metre high, the native vegetation, even though it's good rainfall, sandy soil? I remember John Pate, Professor Pate, talking about how the plants have adapted to suck out the phosphorus, the little bit of phosphorus that's there. So that would be a reason why the native vegetation is small, because of lack of phosphorus, do you think?
No, it's all to do with water, I reckon.
It's not being held in that sandy soil?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, all you have to do is drive through some of the original tracks that went through, or even now, you'll see that the vegetation beside the road is 2 or 3 times as high as the vegetation in the bush.
Yeah.
And that's because A, it's getting water harvested from the road, and B, it's got no competition there.
Yeah.
If you in paddocks that are cleared up to a bush boundary, you'll find the boundary stuff can be higher, and a part of that is water, but the other part can be phosphorus blown into the bush from the paddocks that have been fertilised.
Yeah, or when the farmer spreads his super spreader, the wind's blowing strong, sometimes a little bit might blow into the bush too.
Yeah, exactly. And in the early days in WA, we only farmed the heavy soils, which make up about, when I looked at it 50 years ago, they made up about 30% of the total agricultural soils. The other 70% were light and would not grow anything without phosphorus. And I mean, they were, in terms of agricultural crops, you'd get nothing off them. The nil plots were bare, basically. But on the heavy land, you could get, some of it is very fertile, but most of it you could get about 50% of the maximum production with no phosphorus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is a pretty important podcast for the world, really, because, we have the privilege of seeing this transformation of virgin soil through to very productive, you and I, in our lifetime. I grew up on a virgin farm that had no, we had to clear the land and put the phosphorus on, and you're an expert in fertilisers. And, people think that organic farming's great and you can go to an area and clear the bush and away you go and you can farm forever. I went to Africa for a couple of years, and the view is you've got to do organic farming. They keep shifting from one plot of land to the next, and part of that is because they can burn the organic matter, and that releases, as you know, and we'll touch on this too, other nutrients when you burn in windrows. Just remember 20 years ago you did some windrow burning as an indicator, and you pick up a bit of ash, you pick up a bit of potassium, you pick up alkalinity, maybe a bit of sulfur in when you burn residues from a forest. And so then you have a rain that leaches and you grow a crop or two, and then it's not fertile anymore. So then move on to another organic patch. And in my view, this is not very sustainable. I think you'd agree as an expert that you really should be replacing what you're taking out.
That was one philosophy for fertilising, is we'll calculate what we take out and put it back in. But you see, some soils are very fertile. The Darling Downs in Queensland, you could, they eventually farm without phosphorus and without nitrogen, and you could go for donkey's years. And
my cousin Peter Jackson is at Gurley, south of Moree, and he said they farm for 15 years without any N and P.
Well, they could do it for 50 years on some of those soils, and you say, why throw dollars out there to replace what you're taking off when you can get it for nothing? You can say, I'll do it as a prophylactic thing. We're going to run down one day, we'll replace it, but not many people can make a living that way. When you come to our situation where you start with nothing, you've got to build it up, and that hits the hip wallet. The hip wallet pays.
Yeah.
And once you've built it up, you can build it up to a level where you can go for a few years without. And we had times when, the super bounty was removed and the price of fertiliser went up, or the price of grain came down, and farmers are saying, what can we do? What can we do? And, of course, the easiest way is to stop cost of inputs, and fertiliser is one of those. So one of the big questions we always had to answer was, how long can you go before you need to, it really pays you to put it on? Because a lot of people, when super was cheap with the bounty and so on, the fertility of WA soils, the phosphate fertility went up. When DAP came in and it was exceedingly cheap, they were putting on mainly for getting the nitrogen, but the phosphorus banks were building up. And so you say, well, can we go without phosphorus when times get tough?
And
yes, you can,
yeah.
but you have to know where you sit in the scheme of things. That's where soil testing helps. But in our case, before soil testing, we used to do everything on super history. We'd say, well, you've put this amount out over this amount of time, and that gives you this level of fertility on a zero background soil. And that will run down in this way. We did a lot of work on the residual value, rates of rundown, all that sort of thing. The early days of my career was very much by calculation what you needed.
But there's always a response curve. That's what I've noticed. Even if you've got a good history, if you're going to get any benefit from any phosphorus, the first little bit will be the most vertical.
That's the nature of a response curve, so-called diminishing returns yield.
So if you attempt to put none on, well, that's one option, but the other option is put a tiny bit on. That's probably a slightly better economic option.
Well, that one comes into what we call maintenance stressing, and that's where people do start talking about replacement, and they have a bit of validity in the argument. Initially in WA, you had to put on 3 or 4 times the replacement value, or even more than that if you got onto high fixing carry soils or something like that. But once you'd built up a fertility, you then get to a level where you put in what comes out and it will maintain it. But what I'm saying is that people have gone well beyond that level part on the response curve. So there are certain situations where you can run it down for 5 or 10 years. No one ever does that because everyone had built into their blood that farming is built on super and sub clover. To get people to reduce their rates, that was heresy. We were very unpopular with the fertiliser companies and so on when we were saying, well, you can still make $1, and in fact...
you have to stress test everything both ways, don't you? To know where the middle ground is, to know what's smart, what's sensible.
Yeah.
You don't want to go, organic tends to go down, and the fertiliser companies would like you to be up, but somewhere in between there.
Yeah, well, I had a mate who was producing organic wheat up on Irwin River Station or something like that.
On black soil? No,
it was on light land. And what he'd do, he'd have a paddock where he'd build up the phosphate for 2 or 3 years and then leave it off for 2, and that was enough for the registration. And away he'd go. And there are all sorts of games you can play here, particularly if you do have an idea of the rate of rundown, of the availability of phosphorus that you're putting on. We came up with a lovely little formula, 1 over T plus 1 works like a dream. And that's not for this conversation.
Well, you could just give us a 20-second. What is 1 over T? What is T?
Well, we're saying that if you put the fertiliser on this year, next year T is 1, so next year it's worth half as much. And the year after that, it's worth a third as much.
Then a quarter, then a fifth.
It's losing value through a whole lot of different processes, but it's a very simple rule of thumb.
Right, okay. And as we know, it's not simple. It's very complicated, and we've got all these other nutrients as well and trace elements. So I'd like to steer us now to copper and zinc. I've read Ross Brennan's paper recently and saw his copper results at Esperance Downs Research Station, and the amount of yield that he got without any copper was, I think, about 200 kilos of wheat, 500 mil rainfall zone or nearabouts. And, without any of what we need, you can pull everything back to zero. So that's where I'd like to go now. Do you know much about that sort of trace element?
Well, I was, I started in the department in the 60s, and John Gartrell was the trace element man, and he used to say that you can put the copper out and it'll last you 50 years, right? The reason for that is that the amount you needed to put out in the first year with a crop down the spout was so massive compared with what the plant needed and took up. But you had to put that amount down because of the positional availability. The roots had to get to the copper, and if you just put out what it needed, there wouldn't be enough contact between the copper and roots for the plant to get enough to grow.
Which is your expertise, surface chemistry.
Well, copper is one that is very immobile. It does not leach. It does not move in siliceous soils. Our soils are all sandy surface, except for that 30% of the heavier ones that have got a bit of clay and guts in them. And copper is remarkable in that respect. It really binds onto silica. You can end up with a major problem with copper as a positional availability, which gets me, in your no-till situation, if you top dress or spread copper, it stays in the surface. The only thing it'll move is if it gets some organic matter around it and collates it, and it might move through the soil a little bit. But if you don't plough it in, it sits on the surface in dry soil. And I don't know if you remember the days when your copper deficiency symptoms, you'd see them at the beginning of the season in seedlings. And that was because the surface was dry. The seedlings were growing on the moisture below, but at the break, your surface dries out. And they're not getting any copper. As the season went on, they could grow out of that copper deficiency.
Alan Robson, of course, who passed away recently, he was my honours and masters supervisor, and Alan inspired me on this issue that you're talking about. So I did some work at Esperance Downs with manganese placement, and I put it down 20 and 30 centimetres deep on lupins and quadrupled the yield with the same amount of manganese as what I put in the surface, because in September the surface was dry. The lupins weren't able to suck up the manganese, which is also a trace element.
In that case, there's a big difference between, let's say, lupin and wheat, in that wheat gets away early and has a big demand and it gets most of its nutrients. Then lupin being this is old age coming in, to get to word it. Yeah. But anyhow, it keeps growing until the water runs out. It's a bit like canola.
Indeterminate.
Indeterminate is the word. Thank you.
Yeah.
So it has a demand for nutrients. If you've got more biomass, you need more nutrients.
Yep.
With nutrition, there are things. There's one for you need it for function. Yeah, the timeliness of having nutrients available is a very important bit of fertilising, and you need enough there for when it's a big demand on it, but you also need enough there at the beginning for when it needs to develop and function. So that for nitrogen, for example, you need it there in the first 6 weeks for tillering. It's not a demand from the plant, but you have to have enough in the plant
to trigger the
so
plant.
that it will develop the tillers, all the germ of the tillers there, but for them to grow, they need the nitrogen. Yeah. Later on, you need the nitrogen simply to grow the biomass that comes with the stem elongation and the leaf canopy and all the rest of it. And so ideally, a fertile soil provides nutrients all the time. But when you come to in our soils, which are not that fertile, then the question of the timeliness of the nutrients comes into the thing. And with nitrogen, for example, yes, you need it there early, but you can, if you keep putting it out in our soils, it leaches out, you lose it. So you sometimes need to keep putting it out. And then that raises the controversial question of when do we need to do that and how often do we need to do that? And
Yeah. Now, I remember you gave some great talks 20, 30 years ago about matching nitrogen to the season. More rain, more nitrogen is required.
Exactly.
But for the sake of the people that are listening to us that have never been to Western Australia or Southern Australia, where we have very sandy soils, I'd just like to throw this commenting, a lot of international visitors that come here for soil conferences go out and look at our soil and say, how can you grow anything in this soil? Because it's so sandy. And when I lived in Canada in 96, Bill, the sandy soil there, they pretty much deep sand, they just gave up on it. They said there's no point growing anything. Even alfalfa or lucerne is just struggle because they have 4 weeks between a good thunderstorm event and the sandy soil just doesn't hold anything. And whereas here, we're in the cold winter, so we get a front every. So people, I'm not telling this to you because you and I know this pretty well, but I'm saying it for the sake of those that are listening to us that we need regular supplies of water because our soils are very sandy. Except of course at about this sort of depth where there's often clay down there that can capture some of that, and it also captures not only the water, the sulfur, the potassium, the nitrogen, but not the trace elements that we've talked about. And we've only touched on 2, basically copper and manganese. But of course, there's also zinc. And I don't know what you know about zinc, but maybe you can give us a blurb on that.
Well, zinc is a little bit more mobile and, it doesn't bind quite as strongly as copper. But yes, it also suffers the same problem that it tends to stay where it's put. If a soil's got any guts in it, above and beyond silica, if you get into the gravity soils and so on, it's very much stays where it's put. So it has to be incorporated. And in the good old days, of course, with new land, we always had it going down the spout. Later it became, you'd spread stuff and so on.
Yeah, and foliar,
and the foliar, but the foliar again ends up sitting on the surface. What is, even if it's used once, it doesn't go in unless you incorporate somewhere along the line. Or, as I say, if it manages to get, they sell stuff as a chelate, and it's interesting, the chelation, in that it means that it's held in that organic compound stronger than the soil can hold it. And that's the only way it'll move, which means then the plant has to do the work of ripping the zinc out of the organic complex. And so it becomes a question of if you put chelates out, and there's a lot of that goes on,
for farmers,
they become mobile in the soil, things that normally are not. So the root doesn't have to grow to it. It can come to the roots in the water, but then the plant has to do, once it's in the plant root zone, the plant, the rhizosphere has the chemicals in it to help strip copper out, whether or the zinc out of the chelate, or the iron when you're on some sort, and the plant's able to take it up because it's come to the plant. But in our normal inorganic fertilising that we do in WA, because the plant has to go to it, you have to make sure that it's spread through the soil so that as the roots are going, it's seeing these things that are not mobile in the soil.
Yeah. Now, I read a paper when I was doing my master's on non-wetting soils and manganese, a bit of a focus. I came across a paper that I was quite convinced that, and you tell me if this is right or wrong, or from your experience, that roots aren't good at sniffing out too many nutrients, but it can sniff out nitrogen perhaps because there's a flux or a gradient between where it releases through the soil and the plant roots can find it. That's a couple of studies that I read. Does that sound sort of okay to you? Loosely.
Roots go looking, and when they find a concentration of something, they tend to respond to it. They branch and and so on.
Right, so if you put your trace elements near the nitrogen source, there's a good chance they'll find their way to it as well, because they're going to where the nitrogen is.
Well, at a level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's okay. You're a scientist. You're allowed to say, well, not always.
No. Where I was going was in terms of root responses to nutrition. Art Diggle and I did quite a bit of work with nitrogen on that because of the nature of leaching. And for me, it's an interesting story in terms of wheat. If there's a concentration of nitrogen, it will respond to it. Right, its roots will grow to it. And we had column work where we had nitrogen moving through the columns, and we were measuring the front as it went down, and we were measuring the roots with successive sampling and so on. We found that the roots would respond to where the nitrogen was this week, but the nitrogen then moved and the roots were left behind. So you'd have a bulge in the root density profile and you'd have the bulge of nitrogen move beyond it. And it occurred to me that this is a fairly unique thing for strongly leaching soils like we've got here, because wheat has had 10,000 generations of adapting to an environment, but it hasn't adapted to a leaching environment. If we had 100 years or so of growing wheat here, I'm sure the wheat would have worked out, and here I'm being teleological and giving it a mind of its own, but the wheat would have worked out that it could save a bit of energy to branch further down later sort of business instead of putting all the carbon into where the nitrogen is now. It would have changed its response strategy because of the way the nutrient was available. Well, I've managed to nut out a lot of problems in plant nutrition by pretending I'm a root and thinking, how would I play this game?
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I had the privilege of meeting an American NASA professor who went into agriculture, and late in his life, in his late 50s, he took on this agricultural project to look at root structure and how they work. And you'd enjoy this. He put a bit of plastic over the surface of the root, and then he didn't put a plastic, and then he did water relations, and he looked at what the roots did, and he basically concluded that some are meant to just go out and forric at the top and go flat out, and other roots are meant to chase the moisture down deep. So,
with a wheat crop, you've got seminal roots, which are the initial roots that come out of the seed, seminal seed, and they are very geotrophic. They go down. They just follow gravity. That's what they do while they can. If they run into barriers, chemical or physical, then they don't go down. But they go down, and then you have the nodal roots. For every tiller you get in a wheat plant, you get at least 2 nodal roots, and they are the feeding roots, and they go horizontally. And yes, they do have some downward geotrophic, some downward stuff to them, but they basically explore the surface layers. And, even in fertile soils, your surface layers tend to be more fertile because that's where you recycle all the organic, the nutrients in the organic matter and so on.
Yeah, and
so, that's a natural thing for the plant to have worked out.
Yeah. And I remember if Margaret Roper was here, she's a biological scientist from CSIRO, retired recently, she would encourage us to think about the microbial activity that's linking everything together. And, imagine fungi would move. Fungi probably needs a bit of copper too, doesn't it?
We're getting into the realm of
rhizosphere.
Yeah, and the VAMs, the vesicular arbuscular mycorrhizae.
Yeah, Lynn Abbott stuff.
Yeah, and basically that's an infection of the root with a fungus which is beneficial, basically extends the root system. And so, when a root's there and water's coming in, if there's ions in the water, that is nutrients in the water, they can come in with the water. Yes, the root has membranes that will exclude some things and so on, but
so trace elements.
So if you extend the root system, you access far more of the soil reserves of nutrients and water. It took me 30 years to... No, did it take that long? No, it was 19. I went away on a sabbatical in 80 and came back and sat on the edge of a pit where there'd been deep ripping and so on going, and worked out, geez, roots are important. I'd spent my whole life to that point of time with input, output, put the fertiliser on, here's the response sort of business, and measuring the tops and the uptake and everything you can measure from the tops and never looking at the roots. From that point on, 1980 through to when I retired in 2010, it was roots. So it was the answer to everything, life, the universe and everything. Number 42 of plant nutrition.
And of course, you and I, you delightfully, pushed back a little bit when the no-till thing was starting because you asked the good hard questions, the incorporation of lime, incorporation of trace elements. And as you know, I'm no-till Bill. And so we had some fun times at some conferences.
Oh, yes.
I don't remember if you remember at Calcinated in 1993.
We've had many outings in public, Bill. See, no-till for me, you did a wonderful job in getting that up and going, and you had to be the advocate you were. Mm. I'm known as being very negative. Now, I'm not negative. What I don't like is people peddling their barrow and only looking at the upsides. Everything has upsides and downsides.
Exactly.
Burning stubbles has upsides and downsides. Herbicides do. Cultivation does. I don't mind. Everything you deal with in life has upsides and downsides.
Yep. The SWOT analysis.
And, the people who are getting a new innovation into place, which is what you were doing with the no-till
have business, to shake the cage a little bit.
You had to have people stopping you and saying, look, Bill, no-till also says no tilth. And early in life, for some plants on some soils, some of our soils have very hard setting surfaces. And if you don't stir them up, the roots can't get into them. I've measured canola roots and how rapidly they go sideways, and they go very rapidly sideways. But then I've sat while some other boring speaker at a field day at Corrigan was talking about something or other, and just with my trowel looking at where the canola roots had gone on that particular hard-setting soil, they'd hardly move sideways at all.
Yeah,
it was in a no-till situation, and it had surface sealed, and it hadn't had the benefits of having built the organic matter and the better structure and all the positive sides of no-till.
Yep.
And it was a circumstance where those plants were missing out on all the resources in the interrow because it wasn't disturbed.
Yeah.
And if you remember in the early days, they had the triple disc drills, which just cut a slot. Well, that was hopeless from the point of view of, A, getting the seed to germinate, but B, getting root exploration of the soil, and they need to do that, and they need to do that early. Yes, I was negative.
Yeah, there's a proverb in the Bible that says, let a righteous man strike me, I will not deny it. And I saw you as one of those people. So, I thought you were a good advocate. There were others, though, that weren't necessarily as positive.
Well, I like to stir too. I'd go to the no-till meetings and say, the match and the moldboard, that's the answer. Because, of course, no-till also got intertwined with stubble management and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
But, but you will remember, you'll give us credit here, when Clem Hobbs invented bringing clay up from the surface, from deep, and mixing it in with non-wetting, waxy, sandy soils. You had to plough that, and we've certainly you've just got to do it. You've got to do what you've got to do. And, to overcome that problem, that really is the solution, isn't it?
I mean, the no-till revolution started before you, but you were a major pusher and so on, and you, in the early 80s, you were strong and long. But at the same time, it was just as we were discovering that we'd created all these mechanical hard pans. And so, of course... your stuff was there, don't disturb the soil, or minimum disturbance, however you wanted to define it. And on the other hand, we were seeing these massive responses to putting a plough in a deep ripper.
Deep ripper, yeah.
They were doubling and tripling yields with deep ripping.
Yeah.
And your stuff was, if anything, was keeping yields about the same, but you had all the conservation and long-term aspects and all the rest of it.
No soil blowing away. And
all of that.
Yeah. I did a lot of deep ripping trials. I don't know if you read a couple of my papers.
I know you.
On the south coast where it gets waterlogged, when you deep rip.
No, you were the one. Well, I don't know if you were the one, but there are soils on which deep ripping, the shallower duplexes where the clay's within 10, 20, 30 centimetres.
Not a lot of
ripping
value.
is a bit of pointless because you run into the clay, which is as solid as a rock anyhow. And even getting, gypsum down there doesn't help it much.
Yeah, well, even my brother said to me, where you did those deep ripping trials, I got bogged when I went the following year, because the soil was now loose, and in 18 or 450 mil rainfall zone, there's a fair bit of risk in that as well. So, but you're right. Certainly, no tillage keeps the soil more firm, and it's more difficult for the plant roots to grow. But there is a nice, I remember Alan Robson teaching us soil fertility is three things. It's physical, which is what we're talking about now. It's chemical, which is what we talked about to begin with, which is the fertilisers, and then there's a biological component as well. So I think farmers are now really enjoying, I don't know if you've seen much of the crops these days, but we're going to grow another record crop this year. Obviously, there's a bit more land going into crop than pasture because the government hasn't been kind on the sheep industry in Western Australia, as you'd know. So that's another reason for more crop.
It was a pricing thing, Bill, that the wheat belt moved markedly west when sheep were worth nothing.
Yeah.
Sheep have come back via meat. I don't know about wool. I think wool's pretty...
Yeah, wool's,
days,
It's just that they've banned the export market, so you're not allowed to export live sheep. That's...
Yeah, I know that. But I reckon that's... No, well, you don't want me to get negative on that argument, but...
Yeah, so there are, through time, we've learned now that a lot of farmers are planning the whole program like I did. I had 5,500 hectares of Morrowa for 13 years. Towards the end it was 5,500. But, I pretty much plant most of my crop before it rained. So when it rained on the 10th of May, up comes 80% of my crop, which is really, we couldn't do that back in the day, could we? Because we'd have to wait till the weeds germinated.
Yeah, the herbicide revolution. I mean, when I started, fertiliser was the major cost you could play games with. By the time I'd finished, herbicides had left fertiliser behind well and truly.
Well, you've done your work well, I think, because fertilisers was well understood. You've done a great job. Unfortunately, we don't get resistance to fertilisers. Herbicides, we're going to have to change them all the time.
Oh, dear. No, the crops that I drive through now, well, if you see weeds, I mean...
It's unusual.
It's unusual.
Yeah.
And whereas in my day, it was very usual. Yeah. Well, and in my trials, it was very usual. Keep, actually getting trials in at an appropriate time to have controlled weeds when you don't have control of the cropping of the paddock and so on. A very difficult thing.
Yeah, there's some lovely chemical molecules that are very safe, that are doing a good job at helping us do that, affordably too, I'd say. But I'd like to now swing to Africa and rock phosphate. Now, you've done a bit of work with Mike Boland, who was a tremendous researcher, published prolifically. M.D.A. Boland, if people want to...
That's the boy.
Yeah. Bolland.
Exactly.
Right, and he's published tremendous work.
Yes, he knows how to publish.
Yeah, sadly we lost him 5 or so years ago, but a very gentle person, very thoughtful person, and you had the honour of working with him for a fair bit of your career. That would be right, with Bob Gilks.
Well, I took him on to work on rock phosphate.
Oh, good. Oh, I didn't know that. Wonderful. Yeah. All right.
So finished his PhD.
Right. So the reason I'm niggling at you for this one, Bill, and I don't know where we'll go with it and how much we'll be able to unpack, because my knowledge is nowhere near what it needs to be to get what's in your brain out. But in Africa, a lot of it's landlocked. But there's a lot of good agricultural land there, and you have to travel 1,500, 2,000 kilometres, and the roads aren't very good to get to the centre of, or 3,000 kilometres to get into where some of this agricultural area is happening, particularly thinking DRC, Lubumbashi area. But there's not a lot of phosphorus fertiliser there or availability. There are natural deposits. Now, they vary. Some of them are sedimentary. Some of them are more crystal, which I don't think is very available. But there are some rock, the sedimentary ones I think can be quite available. So a friend of mine, Lindsay Reed, he has started working in Angola on a phosphorus mine called Minbos, and he's extracting this rock phosphate and crushing it and getting it into a granule that can be available. Now, I know because I was in Congo for 2 years, the pH of their soil is about 3.9 in calcium chloride or high 4s in water or mid 4s. And when I put top dress some lime out there, all that lime just disappeared. The next day I went out there and thought, there's no rain. The top dress lime I put out's gone. Where did it go? And of course I thought, the acidity of the soil must have really helped to release it, which makes me think of rock phosphate, which is also very alkaline because, as my crude understanding,
it is a liming material, basically.
It's like our teeth, isn't it?
It's
calcium and phosphorus.
Fluorapatite, more resistant to the bugs than hydroxyapatite, but that's the teeth.
You would think that we could probably top dress some of this rock phosphate out, and it also might dissolve like my lime did, and release some of the phosphorus.
I wouldn't top dress it. I'm sorry.
No.
You've got to incorporate.
No, you've got to top dress it first because you've got to put a tonne per hectare out. Then you incorporate it. Yeah. And obviously I understand that surface thing. We've got to get a maximum surface, dissolving power to pull out that phosphorus. Can you talk to that a little bit, and what advice would you give me if I'm going to talk to these people again and try and we'll do something?
Well, bring me back to the advice I'd give you, but I'll give you a little bit of background. Most of the world's phosphorus is Florida, Morocco, Christmas Island, Nauru, the island ones are bird shit. We actually have the sort of phosphorus you're talking about up at Gingin, and during the war, when there were problems getting phosphate in, they looked at developing that rock phosphate.
What percentage P2O5 was that?
Sorry?
What percentage of that?
It was nodular, so the nodules were relatively high, but they're not deposits. They occurred beneath the breakaways, would you believe, which is completely ridiculous as far as my limited geology says, but that's where they were. Anyhow, coming back to the phosphorus question, when we looked at it with Boland, the Christmas Island was running out of the A-grade ore, which is the hydroxyapatite. It's just a calcium phosphate. But they had tons and tons and tons of what they called B and C grade ore, which had as high phosphate content as the hydroxyapatite, but they were chockers with iron and aluminium contamination. They were very difficult to put into make superphosphate from, to acidify. And with phosphate fertilisers, you have the total phosphorus content, which you have in the ore. Then you have, after you've treated them, they have what they call citrate soluble. And then beyond that is what's called water soluble. Now, the water soluble is the plant available stuff. In most of the world, they say citrate soluble is a measure of the available stuff. It's not. You need water soluble. And in WA, our fertiliser industry always relied on the water solubility of the fertilisers that were put out, which meant that because rock phosphate, even though hydroxyapatite, it's about nearly 100% citrate soluble. It's up there, very available, except it's not. It had to be treated with acid to make it water soluble so that plants could have water soluble stuff in the root zone as they germinate and take off, right?
Yep. So if you had nodule soils that were very acidic.
Yeah, well, we'll get there. Now, my interest in it at the time was less to do with using it. We had plenty of superphosphate and there were other resources for hydroxyapatite and Christmas Island and so on, but it was that the end product of putting water-soluble superphosphate on the soil, on our soils that have a lot of iron and aluminium once you get away from the gutless sands, most of our soils, they've got gravel, they've got the iron and aluminium in them, which is what the B and C grade ore was. Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing it as the end product of us putting on a water-soluble source, and I was interested in the availability of end products, which the essence of your soil testing. Where I'm getting to is that we also had the A-grade ore, but we got that, and then the mob up there said, if you heat it very high, you grind it fine and you heat it high, you calcine it, you make it more available. And that's exactly what we experimented with, was calcined rock phosphate, We had
So what sort of heat are you talking about?
we had some at 300 degrees C, some at 500 degrees C.
Did Boland publish this?
Oh yeah, no, that's where his early publishing is all that.
In the 80s?
Oh yeah. He's oodles of it. So we did a lot of work with that, and one trial I'm thinking of that we had at Badgingarra, 80B8, it went in 1980, and I discovered it again in 2013. It was still showing residual effects, and it was interesting because you're interested in the immediate availability of these things and then their long-term availability.
Yeah.
To get the high immediate availability, we were putting out 10 and 20 tonnes of rock phosphate per hectare, which means we were changing the surface soil completely.
So when you put that much out, you obviously rotary hoed it in?
Oh, yes.
Because
yes.
20
Well, we didn't want it to blow away.
20 tonnes per hectare, that would probably only be about 3 millimetre though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, the top 10 centimetres is about 1,500 tonnes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The top, what did I say, that's the top 100 millimetres is, so it's 15 tonnes per millimetre soil, at bulk density 1.5.
Yep.
So, 20 tonnes is a millimetre or so.
So you'd want to mix that in because like the lime story...
Well, it'd blow away and obviously it wouldn't react. Now, let's come...
Well, it would react right on where the two layers meet, but nothing more than that.
Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah. And I had a PhD student who looked into these sources and so on in the laboratory. And
who was that PhD student?
Oh, Christ.
It's all right, no worries. We'll come back to that.
I can...
but I'd love...
senior moment.
Yeah, I'd love to...
My 1 o'clock mate says tomorrow, Bill. Tomorrow.
That's all good.
We're both in our 80s.
Well, that's right. Well, let's cut us a bit of slack here. Life's a journey, and we don't want to be hard on ourselves.
But anyhow, what I was going to say, there are two things to dissolving the rock phosphate. They are the acidity of the soil and... the buffering, there's three things. There's the acidity of the soil. You said pH 3.5. Well, the Muchet peats are pH 3.5, right? And the early work with rock phosphate in WA back at the First World War and just after there and so on, they got magnificent responses
on
later
those peat soils.
Noel Fitzpatrick did a lot of work, and what it was that the peats were using it as a liming material, basically. It was raising the pH
and getting phosphorus
and providing all that phosphate.
Yeah.
And worked magnificently there.
Yeah.
But what happens is you can have a low pH soil. Some of our sands are low pH, but they have to have pH buffering capacity. You can have water at a low pH, put the rock phosphate in, and you'll only dissolve a little bit because there are not enough protons, not enough acid.
No horsepower.
To dissolve it. Yeah, there's no horsepower. You've got to have the buffering, right? Mm. So you have to have an acid soil that is buffered. And some of our iron and aluminium subsoils that go acid are very well buffered. And they will dissolve up lime if you can get it down to them. The other thing is that you need phosphate buffering power. Mm-hmm. That is that when the stuff dissolves, it is not leached out, but it is held by the soil. And initially it is held relatively loosely so the plant can get it. So when you put any of your rock phosphates into a soil, you need a low pH, you need high pH buffering capacity and having some buffering capacity in the soil, not gutless like the peats. Mm-hmm. Because in the peats, if they drain it all, and they normally peats because they don't drain, but if they drain it all, you'll lose all the phosphate out that was dissolved anyhow to be like nitrogen. It would just move out. Mm. And it raises a point that you well know, that to get the stuff to dissolve, you have to have it in contact with acid soil. It will neutralise that. Mm-hmm. So you only need a little bit here and it's neutralised the soil around it, and then it stops dissolving. If you put in big granules, it won't dissolve.
So you need to move that granule again.
If you do what Boland, they had pelleted C500, calcine 500 rock. The pelleted stuff is no good unless the pellet slakes, because the pellet itself sits there and it's got far too much rock for the amount of acid in that volume of soil.
So what you're saying is like an onion, you can acidify one onion layer, but then it's neutralised.
The rest of it doesn't
stays there.
No, yeah, exactly.
So it either has to be physically moved, which of course tillage will do that, or arbuscular mycorrhiza needs
something
to
has
get in
to
there.
go in and invade it or something like that. Yeah,
pull it apart.
See, we had the same problem with popcorn sulfur. They said, sulfur explodes as a powder, so we'll pelletise it. And they pelletised it, and basically the way the sulphur becomes available is that the bugs,
microbial,
the thiobacillus in the soil, they are like having a sulphuric acid plant. They turn sulphur into sulfate, which the plant can use. And you put a pellet in, you've got far too much sulphur for any bugs in the soil for there to be enough bugs to dissolve it. They could come flocking in and multiply and so on. The soil bugs, I've always called them bugs because they're a mystery to me. But
to everyone.
That it's interesting in that if you provide a substrate they need, then they proliferate. You go and measure thiobacillus in WA soils and they're bugger all there, but you go and put out sulphur, flowers of sulphur, and you got thiobacillus everywhere. They multiply up because they've got the resource there. And it's the same with a lot of our nitrifying bugs and ammonification, the ones that break down organic matter. You've got to provide the organic matter and then you get a massive amount of bugs in the system.
Feed them and they will come, basically.
Exactly.
Which is, one of the reasons why I was pretty keen on trying to hold on to the residue if we could. Because there is food in,
even if it's just carbon.
Yeah, because termites eat just carbon, and termites, they're happy just to eat wood, aren't they?
Apparently in Africa they have a birthday. They are a major of the
ecosystem
cycling.
Well, they were at my farm at Morawa too. Everywhere you scratched, Rick Madden sat in this chair, a month or so ago, and said the same thing. He said, "Bill, everywhere I was going out scratching, looking for gold in your part of the world, or even out in the desert area." He said you'd scratch and there'd be termites there.
Yeah.
So, and termites, of course, they're not eating any nitrogen, but they have protein, so they need nitrogen.
Yeah, that's one that's always amazed me. I've looked at fruit fly and they're 100% protein. Yeah. Yet the fruit is bugger all nitrogen.
Well, Margaret Roper puts it this way: free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria. But there's a CSIRO did a study up at Geraldton on a guy's farm and found that in the stomach of termites there was bacteria that splits the atom, splits the nitrogen.
Termites eat pure carbon in my
where they're going to get the protein.
Backyard, yet they're pure protein.
Yeah.
Which means they're 16% nitrogen or thereabouts, and they've got it from somewhere.
Yeah, probably from what we're breathing.
Well, yeah, probably.
78% nitrogen is what we're breathing, isn't it? So Yeah. Some little tips for me on Africa. I think I'm picking up. So if we can encourage them to get hold of some of the rock phosphate, it's quite likely to have some value in the very acid soil.
Grind it, it's a win.
Grind
it's got fine particles.
How fine do you think?
Very fine.
How fine
as you can go, and
tell
that
me,
costs you, of course.
I know. So what? Give me some ballpark figures.
Well, I don't know.
I mean, we're talking 100 micron.
My memory's not up to it. It'll be in Boland's papers.
Okay.
They do the physical and the...
All right, so grinding it's one. Secondly is heating it.
Well...
Depending on the type of rock phosphate that it is.
What happened is in this total citrate water analysis thing, heating it turned a lot of what was completely unavailable into citrate. You changed... You know, if you had a total and you had no water soluble, and if you heated it, you made it into citrate soluble. Citrate soluble's more on the way to plant soluble and just the...
Because citrate soluble, for those that don't know anything about chemistry, is acidic. So if we put it in acidic
you put acid
soil
into it, and it So
if you put it in acid soil,
exactly,
you're sort of putting it, making the citrate soluble useful.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's very useful information.
Yeah, well, no, I'd have fine particle sizes and as you can get, but it costs you money to make them fine.
Yeah, but transporting it 4,000 kilometres or across the ocean also costs you money, so you have to weigh all that up.
Yeah. No.
Good.
No, if they've got acid soils and they've got a bit of buffering in them, then rock phosphate might be a goer. But we found they had massive programs. A New Zealander got onto it, and Boland was well and truly in there. By then I'd pulled out of this argument. But the only places it works is where you've got acid soils. You have to be moist, and it's a bit like the thiobacillus. It has to be warm. We had a bloke called Swaby making so-called bio-super by saying we'll put a bit of sulfur in with some rock phosphate and inoculate with thiobacillus, and it will do its own little superphosphate making plant in the soil. Didn't work in Australia. Works in the tropics on those iron and aluminium soils.
So do you think you need to seed you need to seed some of these bacteria? Do you think? So what you're saying?
This was the other thing we worked out, that you didn't really need those if in fact they are around in small amounts. You provide the sulfur so they can use it, but they needed the warm, moist conditions which we don't have in most of southern Australia, where these things were used.
In Africa, where I'm thinking.
If you're thinking up near the tropics in Africa, they worked in Malaysia. You can find the literature.
Yeah.
They've worked in places like that.
Yeah.
And
so a combination.
So in that case, they were even adding the thiobacillus. I haven't researched the work that's been done with rock phosphate in the tropics.
So adding sulfur with the rock phosphate with
they called it bio-super.
Right.
Yeah.
Is not a bad little strategy.
Look it up before you recommend it, Bill. It's a bloke called Swaby, and it'll be back in the 50s and 60s.
How do you
he was CSIRO.
How do you spell his name?
Swaby.
What's his initial?
A good question.
Yeah, that's all right. No worries. No, that's great, Bill. Yeah. All right. Well, what sort of we're coming to the end of this lovely chat. Thank you for taking the time out. What are you doing in retirement, and how are you? You're looking in good health, so congratulations. So what's the trick, Bill? You can teach me something for the next...
be as lazy as you can.
That sounds like the controversial Bill Bowden I've known forever. I don't believe that's true.
I did 5 or 6 years after I retired because my work was my hobby.
Yeah.
Now I'm as slack as buggery. I was never a good writer. I was always promising to write, and I haven't written.
Yeah.
So now basically I don't do anything. I'm pretty good at it.
Except you go up to John Borges' farm and camp out a bit.
Yeah. We shout at each other all the way there.
Yeah, that's good.
He's a Christian and I'm not. He likes Trump and I don't. And he's very right-wing and I'm not, and da-da-da-da-da. So...
Well, like we said, you need these two, views to help sharpen, what we think.
My grandfather said every dog needed its fleas, yeah.
And every dog has his day too.
Yeah, I think I've had mine, Bill.
Well,
a long time ago.
Well, and you've had a great day, and you've been a tremendous influence in West Australian agriculture. I know that, and I appreciated you arguing with me regularly. That was delightful.
Well, I discovered late in life that I am a bully. Harry Fells told me I was, and what rubbish, and I found, but I am a bully, and for that I regret. So you've got people who know me who are watching this. I apologise. I never knew I was bullying. It was not a deliberate tactic, but not like my mate, Mr. Trump. But anyhow.
Well, I quite like Trump, but that's all right.
That's all right. Yeah. You can like whoever you like. But I mean, you believe there's a greater being and all the rest of it. So,
Yeah. Well, just to end on that, I mean, I think it takes faith to believe anything, really. It takes faith to believe this chair's going to work. It takes faith to believe that so many billions of years ago everything came from nothing. We all evolved into what we are now, which is quite an amazing, thing. So either way, I think it takes faith. So we all have faith in something. The question is, are we comfortable in that? And and I'm certainly comfortable in my Christian faith. So, but thank you for being honest with me. And look, that was a beautiful moment for you to make that apologetic comment. I think that hats off to you. And yes, I certainly felt some of that bullying, but it didn't worry me because I knew I was...
You're tough.
I was safe in, some of the things I believe. But as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another, as King Solomon said. So, Bill, thank you for helping to sharp the West Australian agriculture industry, particularly in fertility. Good on you, and all the best in the last years of your life with your wife, and enjoy. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, William. Righto.